I'm really glad that Rory MCGREAL is here today with us. Rory is the co-editor of the International Review of Research in Open and Distance Education. He is UNESCO Commonwealth of Learning International Council for Open and Distance Education Chair in Open Educational Resources and Director of the Technology Enhanced Knowledge Research Institute at Athabasca U. He was previously Associate VP Research at Athabasca, and his present research interests include assessment and accreditation of online learners using OER, mobile learning, and OER policies and mapping. He is the creator of OER Knowledge Cloud and a founding member of the Oer University International Consortium. Please join me in welcoming Rory. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I hope I can keep you all awake. And I press this at the top. No. Oh, in the circle. Okay. That's it. Okay. Away we go. I'd like to start off with just a comment, and I learned something new from Antoine's talk this morning, especially where he commented that students have a right to have their knowledge and learning accredited and accepted. And I discussed that with them at lunchtime, and I suggested that it's not just students, it's everybody, anyone. It's a human right to have your learning accepted and accredited. And in Canada, we have a major problem with that, with immigrants coming to our country and highly qualified. We don't accept their credentials, nor do we give them a route to get their credentials recognized. And I think that that's a crime against humanity. I think that this is a basic human right, that if you have your knowledge, you should at least be able to have the opportunity to have it assessed and accredited. And that's one of the main purposes of the Open Education Research Universitas initiative. 35 universities around the world are doing that. They're saying that learners who learn online, whether it be formal or informal, have a right to have their learning assessed and accredited and given proper accreditation and degrees when they fulfill all the requirements. So I think that that's something we should all hold on to, that this is a human right that we're talking about. Now, I'm talking today about why we need to go to open education resources. And of course, everyone knows, well, they're free. That's a good reason. But I came to open education resources from a different angle, from the learning object days, when we discovered, and working with Gilbert and David Porter and others, we found out that really, if it isn't open, how can you share this stuff? That there's all kinds of restrictions on licenses and things like that. Just to let you know that this these slides are openly licensed, as you might expect, but I use some images under fair dealing, and I'll be talking to you as part of this about fair dealing in Canada and how we can take advantage of it. I'm one of 4 UNESCO chairs, and actually in open education resources. We have about 18 UNESCO chairs in Canada on different subjects, but internationally we have 4 on open education resources. And just recently 2 more came, and I didn't have time to put them on the slides. One in Mexico and the other one in Slovenia, where Slovenia as a government has announced an open education resource policy. And so the work I'm doing, and my responsibility as a UNESCO chair in open education resources and as Commonwealth of Learning, International Council of Open Distance Learning, is to disseminate information and to promote the use of open educational resources. And the assembly, promotion, the use, reuse of OER across borders, internationally, within our institution, within our province, within our country, and internationally. And we're doing this in support of the Paris Open Education Resource Declaration in 2012, which we took part in, and it was supported by UNESCO and the Commonwealth of Learning. And basically the declaration says, you know, let's get going and start using any publicly funded knowledge created should be open and available to the people. As part of the UNESCO chair, we've developed at Athabasca University the OER Knowledge Cloud. And if you type that into Google, you'll find it. It's a repository of about 800 scholarly articles and reports pertinent to open education resources. This includes MOOCs and virtual mobility, different related aspects of open education resources. We are partners in the Amongus Euro project, which is to promote international collaborations on openness. And as part of that, we work with the different organizations here around the world, and it's promoted by the European Union. And we're looking at ways people can connect and collaborate together across borders using open education resources, MOOCs, and virtual mobility. And virtual mobility, for those, it's a big issue in Europe, and to some extent here in Canada, is the ability of a student to have their credentials recognized at different universities. So, for example, if you take your course at Oer University, we would accept that at Athabasca, and vice versa. And we're much further ahead in that in Canada than they are in Europe and many other parts of the world. We did a report for this Euro project, Policies for OER Uptake. And if you go to the Power Up site, you will find about 80 reports on OER and other aspects of openness in 80 different countries. And we were responsible for the Canadian report. And our report that we put in about 2 years ago was basically that nothing's happening in Canada, that it's a barren zone. That was our report. And but since then, especially in Western Canada, and I'll be talking about it more, there's been some really exciting developments. And now I can honestly say that Canada is a world leader in open education resources, at least so far Western Canada. And we're hoping that Ontario and Quebec and the rest of the country come in with us and work with us. My motivation for supporting OER and being a UNESCO chair is that I believe that the primary challenge for us as educators in the 21st century is to educate everybody. John Daniels reminds us that there's about 98 million students capable of post-secondary education by 2020 or 2025 who will not be able to access a post-secondary education because either there isn't a place anywhere or they don't have the money. And this is not just in developing countries. This includes Canada and many of the developed countries. And I believe as educators, we've got to find ways of educating them. This is our responsibility and the major challenge for us in the 21st century. And John Daniels tells us that we'd have to build 4 traditional universities every week in order to meet this demand. A traditional university of about 30,000 students, 4 a week. We just can't do that, we know that. And so we have to find other ways of ensuring access to education for these 100 million more students, plus the students that we have already. How do we educate all these learners? This is the question that we need to answer. OER, I believe, will be part of the answer. I don't think it is the answer. And to be honest with you, I don't think there'll be one answer. There'll be many different answers and different ways of approaching this problem. But we do know that mass education is possible, especially those of us who've been in the open education movement for years. We can educate large numbers of students. We can now localize and internationalize the content, especially if it's open. We can change it however we want. We must recognize that the world economy is online. Society is online. People are getting married online. They're dating online. Everything's happening online. And we have to recognize that. And that has to be part of what we do as educators. And we're capable of now of training people just when they need it. So as to give you an example, I wanted to fix my light switch the other day. Just in time, I went on the web and I typed in how to fix my light switch, and I found the page, and I learned just in time how to do it properly, and I didn't injure myself, much to my wife's surprise. So, is free education possible? And I believe it is. And I'm not saying that nobody's going to pay for it, but I think that governments, even with their present cheap, how can I put it, way of funding education, their cutbacks and everything, that there are ways within present budgets and others to increase access to education and learning. And we've seen a few of the possible ways here. Now, one of the big trends that is enabling us to get out and promote education among the masses is mobile learning. And I became aware of mobile learning in 1999. And just before that, I was working with an Irish colleague who got a grant from Nokia on mobile learning. And I scratched my head and I said, you know, what the heck is that guy talking about? Like, how do you learn on a mobile phone? And anyway, later that year, I was driving through a small village in the Philippines with no electricity, and I slammed on the brakes because I could not believe what I saw. And what I saw was a farmer up to his knees in the water of a rice paddy behind 2 oxen, and he was digital messaging. And I couldn't believe it, because at that time in Canada, nobody was digital messaging. We weren't there yet. And I looked it up and I found out that at that time, the Philippines does more digital messaging per capita than any other country in the world. And I looked it up a few months ago, and it still does more digital messaging per capita than any other country in the world. So they're still there. But what really shocked me was when I saw that device he had in his hand, I didn't see a phone. What I saw was a very powerful computer. In fact, that mobile phone was a more powerful computer than the one I had on my desktop, which was 3 years old. And that's when I suddenly woke up to the idea, hey, there's something here, we can do something with this. And we started our research at Athabasca on mobile learning shortly after that. There's over 2 billion people are now on the internet. of a world population of 7 billion. So about a quarter of the world's population is now on the internet. 4.5 billion mobile subscriptions. There's 1.5 billion mobile internet users, and 90% of the world's population is accessible to using mobile devices. And actually, some of the inaccessible places are here in Canada. We have quite a few of them. Even in Alberta, the rich province of Alberta, we have places where that are inaccessible. There's more time now spent on the internet with mobile devices than with desktops. And in fact, I think this year was the first time that tablets and mobile devices outsold laptops and desktop computers. So the world isn't changing, the world's already changed. In many ways, we've got to catch up to this. The world is mobile. 1 out of every 3 people only access the internet using a mobile device. Now I want to step back here with these cartoons that explain it fairly simply. Many people take the scientific method, and there are others who are the creationists. And the scientific method starts with the facts and draws conclusions. And the creationist method starts with a conclusion and then looks for facts to support it. And we have what I call educational creationists. They believe that God created the classroom in the form it exists in, and that that is the perfect way of teaching, and all other ways are either irreligious or they're not valid. This is the creationist view of education. Well, let's look at facts. God didn't create the classroom. In fact, pagans created the classroom. Hero and the ancient Greeks in Egypt, in Alexandria, created the Library of Alexandria, and they're the ones who started the classroom. They didn't believe in God. These were pagans, or believed in many gods, I should say. This is the origin of the classroom, and it was not founded because of pedagogical reasons. It was founded for one reason, and that was this. There was one manuscript. There was only one manuscript of what they were learning. So the only way they could access the knowledge was to go into a classroom with the teacher with the manuscript in there. So there's no sound pedagogical basis for classroom teaching. It's done because of scarcity. And today, we don't have that scarcity anymore. The rationale for the classroom no longer exists. And even in the Middle Ages, when the printing press, they printed one big book and put a lock on it, and the lecturer would come, unlock it, and read the book to the students assembled in the classroom. And let's be very clear about this. There is no evidence that classroom teaching is the best way of teaching. None. There is not one shred of evidence that classroom-based teaching is better than teaching using technology at a distance or otherwise or any other way. I want to repeat that because we still heard, even in the 21st century, that some people, the creationists, they believe that the classroom is the end-all and be-all. The fact is, they don't have any evidence. It's not like there's some evidence and that we're debating about it. They don't have any. Check the research. I've checked it. They don't have any scientific basis to claim that the classroom is in any way superior to online learning. And in fact, with the immense amount of information and access to all kinds of knowledge that we have on the internet, to confine learning to a classroom doesn't make any sense. And thank goodness in our universities, in our schools now, we are using the internet and we are using the resources that are available. So we are branching out from what the traditional classroom was. Now, we know now that God didn't create the classroom. However, we do know that St. Paul, who's the patron saint of distance education, he founded distance education. Distance education, we know, was created by God using St. Paul. So we're on the side of the angels. We have proof, and we're talking about facts. We're talking about facts. We're not using a creationist argument, which isn't even true, when pagans created the classroom, not Christians or any others. And this went on to the medieval university, and it went on for so long that people just accepted it as a fact without really questioning it. And of course, up until very recently, with the internet, really there weren't many or any even better ways of doing it than the classroom. But now there's all kinds of ways we can branch out and promote learning. And the classroom is not the end all and be all. Mind you, there's no evidence that the classroom is the worst way of teaching either. What the evidence says is, and it's very clear, the research, is there's no significant difference. And you can look that up online, no significant difference phenomenon, and you will see there's about over 400 educational research studies showing no significant difference, no matter what technology you use, no matter whether it's at a distance or on-site or whatever. So now I want to get into why open education resources. Let me take a drink here. Getting too excited. Why OER? Well, number one, we have some very stringent copyright laws, and they're different in many different in countries. And now they're coming up with these extortionate trade agreements, like we've just signed with Europe, and now with APEC and in the Pacific countries, and they're trying to force on us very strict regimes of copyright, and that makes it more and more difficult for us to use copyright restricted material. This poem is very appropriate for today. It came in the 18th century or late 17th century. They hanged the man, 19th and 18th centuries. They hanged the man and flogged the woman who steals the goose from off the common, but leaves the greater villain loose who steals the common from off the goose. And the internet is our commons. It's our knowledge commons. It belongs to all of humanity. This is our heritage. And they punish some kid who downloads a song, they punish them and their parents. And yet the people who are trying to close off the commons and turn it into different walled gardens are getting away with it. And we've got to, we need to be aware of that and fight to keep the open internet open. It's very important, I believe, for us as educators to do that. And you will notice in those days they were very sexist, hanging the man and flogging a woman. They didn't believe in equality. Now, why are these strict copyright laws being pushed on everybody around the world? And by the way, Julius Assange revealed emails between the American embassy here and the Prime Minister's office showing that our copyright laws, the recent changes, were primarily made in the United States, as are the Australian, New Zealand, and many other countries. So they're pushing their view of copyright very strongly on the world. And the US is a major exporter of these cultural products, and they make a huge amount of money from them, and that's why they're pushing strict copyright. This map shows the relative size of a country based on its income from, based on its income from intellectual property, copyrighted material, etc. And as you can see, the US and Europe are bloated. That's why they are supporting very strict, rigid copyright laws, because it's in their interests. Over 50% of royalties in the world go to the United States. So it's huge money for them. And they are going to keep pushing and pushing on countries their views of copyright. They use the term intellectual property. And as the judge says, you know, ooty wooty sweet patootie is intellectual property. Well, I would argue it's neither intellectual, which is pretty clear, and it's not property. It's an Orwellian word to describe something that it isn't. Very clearly in common law, which we have in Canada, and in the United States, and in all the common law countries around the world, it is not property. It is not, you cannot sue somebody on the basis of it being property. It is not property, it is a copyright. What the correct term that we should use, and I hope people start using it more, is privileged monopoly. According to our tradition and Queen Anne's law, which started our copyright tradition, copyright was brought in not to protect the rights of the author, which most people seem to believe. It was brought in to restrict the rights of the owners of the material, or the so-called owner. It was to restrict their rights, not to give them rights. In France, they do. France, they have le droit d'auteur. They have a different tradition, and many parts of Europe have it. But in our tradition, we brought in copyright for one reason: to spread knowledge. That's why we brought it in. We thought that if we give a privileged monopoly to the creator for 18 years and allow them to renew it up to 28 years, that this would stimulate and encourage people to create art and books and other types of creative materials. That's the basis of copyright law in the common law countries. It's to give them a monopoly, and it's a privilege. The reason we're giving them the monopoly is because we believe that this will help to share and spread knowledge. And that's the origin, and that's the word we should be using, privileged monopoly, rather than intellectual property. But the big publishers don't like us using the real word, monopoly, because nobody likes monopolies. And we all want to guard property. So they use that, even though legally it is not property. Intellectual property, or is it a manifestation of government intervention in social relations? The big publishers want to pretend that they are the guardians of free enterprise and competition, but monopolies stop competition, so they don't like using the word monopoly. But that is in fact what copyright is. It's similar to imposing a duty, limiting people's freedom, and inflicts a burden on users. We accept that because we believe that giving the creator a monopoly for a short time will help us to increase and expand our knowledge and encourage learning and encourage the useful arts, as they say. And this is the basis of copyright law in Canada and the United States. But all these locks they're putting on the material, David Wiley reminds us that openness is the skeleton key that unlocks every attempt at vendor control and lock-in. Oops. They're trying to lock in your content and decide for you how you're going to use the material. And I can give you an example. I bought a book on iTunes, and I was on the plane, and I went to read my book, and it wouldn't let me because I wasn't connected to the internet, and it couldn't verify my identity. So I couldn't read my book that I'd paid for on the plane. And I thought, well, that takes the cake. Then I got to France, and I was in my hotel room, and I thought, well, I'll read now. I went to read it, and they wouldn't let me read it in France. This is my book. This is my device. They're trying to control you every which way. They want to control how, when, where, why you use their material. They're not happy. They're not happy with just selling you material. You remember we used to live in a world where you bought something, you got it. Do you remember that? You buy it, you get it, it's yours. And now they brought this new concept into the world. You buy, but you don't get. And that's part of the world we're living in now. They want to control everything you do. So it's not just, it's like they sell you a coat, but you're only allowed to wear it on Sundays at these type of events, and don't bring it to church and all of these other things. And you're supposed to have to conform to that. That's the world we live in. But the two big reasons why we need open education resources are digital rights management and digital licenses. I call it digital restrictions management because we're talking about restrictions, not rights that they put on. Now, with digital rights management, they lock the content that you buy, and you can't do any of these things: copying and pasting, text-to-speech, changing the format, moving the material, printing it out, moving geographically from one country to another, using after their expiry date. They even have a dead kill date on it, and you can't resell it like you can a print book. All of these things are protected by digital locks. How many here have actually read the license that when you buy one of these books? One. So there's one nerd in the audience. I'm a nerd too. I've actually read these licenses, and I want to talk about the licenses too, because the licenses reinforce the locks. And what we have to recognize is this: that our device is our property. They talk about intellectual property, which isn't, it's a privileged monopoly, but our device is our property. And the digital rights management, it restricts our freedom to use our property. They go in and disable parts of our device without our permission, or sorry, we've given them permission by clicking on the license. And the question is this: can we not own and control our own property anymore? Is that the world we're living in? That somebody else owns and controls our property? It sort of reminds me, well, I'll tell it anyway. My sister wants to be buried in a cardboard box. And I'm saying, well, no, you can't do that. Oh, yeah, I want to be in a cardboard box. Because she wants to control us, me and her husband, beyond the grave. She wants to control us so as we'll look cheap. And this is what's happening, is they're controlling us beyond the grave. On this, after the sale, you remember you used to buy, you got it, you could do what you want with it. They want to control us, and they are controlling us after we buy it. And again, it's a symptom of changing times. They lock up our devices to suit themselves, not us. They handcuff us and restrict us what we can do with our devices. But we're innocent. We haven't done anything wrong, but they're locking us up anyway. And they've even proposed this, copy protection that destroys your computer. And we laugh at this. This was actually brought into the United States Congress, this law. Luckily, they threw it out fairly quickly. But the publishers actually got their bought congressman to go in and propose it in the United States Congress. That if you were using their material that they thought in an illegal fashion, they could go in and bang and knock out your computer. Now, the digital licenses, which we've agreed only one person here has actually read, when you click on it, you've agreed that they can do all those things to you, that they control you after you've bought, paid for. You haven't really bought it, but they make you think you've bought it. But you've also agreed that the owners have no liability, even if it doesn't work. So it didn't work for me, the book, when I was in France. They're not liable for that. I've agreed there's no liability for them. We've agreed that they can invade our computers without any further permission. So when you click on that license, you've agreed they can come in and do whatever they want with your data, with your privacy. You haven't agreed that they can do something just in relation to that book you bought. You've agreed they can come in and do what they like with your computer. And you've agreed that you don't own it, that you have a privilege to use it. And the most onerous thing is, and this is a criminal law in many countries now, you're prohibited to show the content to others. So if you're reading an interesting passage, maybe you're reading 50 Shades of Grey or one of those things, and you want to show it to your spouse, if you do that, you've broken the law. Not only that, it's criminal to do it in the United States and many countries. That's criminal offense. And you've agreed by the license that if you do that, you must immediately delete it from your computer, the book, and notify the publisher. And you've agreed to that with your license. So you can't show it. So students who are studying together, they're not allowed to show it to anyone else. That's part of the license. And you also must agree that you have no rights. So in many countries, and I'll be talking about them later, in Canada, we have fair dealing rights and fair use rights in the United States. But when you click on the license, you've agreed that you don't have those rights. They can take them away from you. So very onerous, these restrictions. And that is why I turned to open education resources, is that we found out very early on when we were experimenting with mobile devices that we just could not use commercial content. We couldn't use it. You can't switch it from one device to the other. In fact, I've just moved from a Mac Air, an old Mac Air, to a new Mac Air. And Microsoft wanted another $300 because I only had a license for my Microsoft software on that machine. I didn't have the license on this machine. And so they restrict you in so many different ways that we cannot really use them in education. But if we have open textbooks, you can copy and paste. Text to speech, you can use it, format change, move material, print it out, go anywhere in the world with it, it'll still work. Reuse, remix, remash it, do what you like with it. And you retain your privacy and your digital rights. And so that is my main argument for using them. And on top of that, of course, they're free, which free to the user. I believe they are essential for e-learning implementations. We must have open resources in learning. Access rights, the vendors control how, when, where, and with what specific brands of technological assistance audiences are able to access the content. Full control over you. They've got their hands on you as you're working. And as I said before, this new concept has come into the world. David Wiley reminded of it as first, is you buy something and you don't get it anymore. Look at this commercial learning service or Rent-A-Book. The students own nothing. They can share nothing, save nothing, sell nothing. When the subscription ends, all of it ends. The publishers own the students' data. If they underline and highlight in the book, it's owned by the publishers, not by the student. The student isn't allowed to transfer the data out of the system. And David Wiley gave us this information here in the United States. It's a bit similar in Canada, usually a bit more expensive. Netflix, you get 20,000 movies, $8 a month. Hulu, 45,000 TV shows, $8 a month. Spotify, 15 million songs you have access to, $10 a month. CourseSmart, one biology text, $20.25 a month for one text. This is how out of line the textbook market is with the real world that we live in. And again, another strong reason why we need to get out of these commercial textbooks and into open educational resources. David put it this way: when you subscribe to content through digital service, the publisher achieves complete and perfect control over you and your use of the content. Now, when we were looking in Canada for open initiatives, the one big one we found was, of course, Open Data, which is a great initiative in Canada and federally. And of course, it can be the only one because, as we all know, we're the only country in the world without a national education authority. It belongs to the provinces. And the provinces guard their independence diligently, even more so than European countries. In fact, in education, our provinces are more independent than countries in Europe, where the European Union does make pronouncements on education. We are supporting and we are founding members at Athabasca University and of the OER Universitas initiative. And it's formed for this purpose, that learners who access OER and acquire knowledge and skills, they can't have their learning assessed and accredited. We are creating open education resource pathways to accreditation. There's now more than 35, and I learned today Curtin University in Australia has just joined, and last week MESI in Russia and the OU UK. So we have 35 members around the world on 5 continents now supporting this. And what they're doing is collaborating together, building these OER pathways to assessment and accreditation for learners. Now, I mixed up my slides here a bit. I'm going back to the Canadian context again. We had a big split in the Council of Ministers of Education over the Paris Declaration on OER. And the split was, for the first time, by the way, there's always been splits. It's usually Alberta is my province which decides they don't want to go along with the other provinces. Not Quebec. People think it's Quebec, but actually Alberta's worse. That's usually the split. But the big split this time was the first time it ever happened at the Council of Ministers of Education Canada, where all of the post-secondary supported the Paris Declaration, and all of the K-12 ministries were against it. And surprising. And the point was that for the K-12, they're into the publishers for hundreds of millions of dollars. And to divest themselves of the publishers would be an enormous task. And they're sort of married to the publishers. But to me, that's not a reason for not doing it. That's the reason you want to get out of them. There's huge savings to be made. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in savings at the K-12 level. But anyway, what happened was, as a compromise at the meeting in Iqaluit, the K-12 all agreed to agree with the Paris Declaration as long as they don't have to do anything. And that's where it is today. In Alberta, we are talking with our K-12. Our higher education is supporting our initiative, but we are talking to K-12, and we are looking at ways of moving forward with it. And we hope that other provinces will do so, because the really big savings for us are in the K-12 area. Back to the OERU. The idea of the concept of the ORRU is put together here by Jim Taylor. So learners access courses based solely on open education resources, freely available online. We have academic volunteers and student support networks, so they help each other. They go to one of the participating institutions and they pay a fee for the assessment. So if they want to get assessment and accreditation, they pay a fee. And then the participating institution gives credit for the courses, and when they get enough credits, we give them a degree. And that's the concept behind the OERU. And here's another way of looking at it from Friesen and Murray, is the traditional university model is this. It's our students taking our course content, using our teachers, with our assessment, and we give them our credential. This new concept is any learners, not our students at all, any learners anywhere in the world, using any content, OER content, but even other content if they want to do it, any content, using any faculty or no faculty at all, or mentors or other things. But if they want an Athabasca University credential, they take our assessment. They take our degree to get our degree. If they want one from Curtin University, they take the Curtin assessment. And we have that in place now at Athabasca. We've had it for about 20 years, where you can challenge for credit. And you can come to our university and say, well, I know second year biology, and we give you the assessment. You pass the assessment, we give you the credit for that. And we're pushing the idea of mini MOOCs, so as instead of going for a full course, you get 1 credit, then 2 credits, then 3 credits, and you can add them up step by step in a smaller fashion. Now, the idea of assessment is very important. The credibility, the authenticity of the assessment is essential. And that's why we limit membership into the OERU to publicly accredited or publicly recognized universities and colleges. We do not accept any unaccredited members. We have on-campus exams. We can have individual invigilators or proctors, and we can do this using computers now, computerized testing. It can tell who you are by the way you type. And we can have special cameras to make sure no one is in the room. Or we can, as was proposed this morning, we can give take-home exams where you really can't cheat on it. You've got to think and come up with your original ideas. So we can use these computerized biometrics, portfolios, projects, and we want to reduce the labor costs so as we can do this in an efficient manner to help our students. And we put a report on that. Anyone wants to see more about our approach to this, the report on assessment and accreditation of learners, it's at the Commonwealth of Learning site, call.org. Now, the breakthrough in OER came with BC Campus. They were the first. They have now over 90 higher education courses. They're partnered with California, working with Washington State, Utah, and creating open textbooks. And they're the first ones and the leaders in Canada, and certainly we can thank David Porter's leadership for that. In Alberta, we announced in April of this year, $2 million for open education resources at the post-secondary level. And I'm co-chair of the committee. And what we're doing is working with BC and to create useful open educational resources. And one of the initiatives as part of what we're doing is we're building wraparounds, the textbooks that BC has identified. So we put in quiz material, test material, multimedia, videos, wraparounds textbook, which open universities have been doing for many years with commercial textbooks. And we're doing that because we find that about 90% of teachers, they just want the whole package. They don't want to take this module and put this together and put that together. They want a whole package for their course. And we can give it to them. And we can give them a whole package. And if that professor finds that this module doesn't work for him or her, they can take it out and put in their own or do, because they're open education resources. They can change and mix and do what they want with them. So Washington State was a leader, and they came out even at the school level, where they went to their legislature and they showed 2 books. They said, this is the political science, grade 11 political science book that's used in most classrooms in Washington State. It was 15 years old, very heavily used, but they couldn't afford to get it every year and keep it up to date. And then they showed, and it was $100, it cost the state $100 for that book. Then they showed the open educational resource political science book, up to date to that month. Free online, printed out $9. And that's what convinced the legislatures in Washington State to go towards open education resources. A big difference and a big saving for taxpayers in that state. Utah has, again, a K-12 initiative similar to that, with all kinds of free textbooks. California came up with the open textbook law, expanding student access and fueling faculty innovation. Since then, there's about 4 or 5 other states who've passed legislation on open educational resources. So the movement is on. Last week, President Obama at the United Nations made a big plea supporting open education resources, encouraging other countries to go along with the United States that is pushing a very strongly open education resources, particularly in the college sector. $2 billion they've put into the college sector for creating open educational resources. And then, of course, we have the MOOCs, which I'm not going to go into detail. We've had some excellent descriptions of MOOCs today, and I think we have a good idea of what they are. The main thing for us to remember is that they're made in Canada. Canada was first on the MOOC thing, not the United States, as many people seem to think. But the idea of MOOCs, and I remember the reaction at our university, where we've been doing mass open education for many years. We're scratching our heads and wondering, you know, what's all this about? You know, just because the Americans are doing all this stuff. I mean, we've been doing it for many years. And it was mixed feelings about it, because people thought, you know, these are Johnny-come-latelys coming into our territory. And still some people think that. But what I thought was, wow, at least now they're paying attention. And for the first time, our politicians called us up. Our politicians have been ignoring us for years, and they're saying, you know, why don't you do MOOCs? And we said, well, we've been doing them. You know, this is what our job is. We're an open university. We've been doing this type of thing for years. Oh, and you know, George Siemens, who was one of the first MOOCs and came up with the word MOOC, he's one of our faculty. Oh, they were really surprised. So it gave us an in, and I believe that this MOOC phenomenon is one of the reasons why BC campus and Alberta have been able to move with the politicians, that they've woken up and realized it. And the same thing is happening right across Europe and in many other countries, that as soon as MIT and Stanford do something, everybody wakes up and says, oh, wow, you know, why aren't we doing that? So, open universities created MOOCs. We have generations of ODL innovation. They come up now, oh, the Khan Academy, the flipped classroom. We've been doing this for years. This isn't something new that Khan invented. We've known about this for years. It's in the literature, and so it is a bit frustrating for us. There's now the phenomenon of the commercial MOOCs. But my view of the commercial MOOCs is this, is if we in the public sector can't get our act together and do it, good luck to them. I hope they make a fortune. I hope they really can do something. But we've got to smarten up, and you know, instead of whining about the commercial sector getting into it, we've better start doing something. And I've always had this attitude. I'd rather them whine about what we're doing than us whine about what they're doing. So they whine about what we're doing, and rather than we whine about what they're doing. Let them be the whiners. We should be the doers and get moving on it. And of course, yes, the MOOCs, there's a victory of packaging over content and over learning itself even. And we were pushing for many years the 10 best university courses to get this around, and we didn't really get anywhere with that. I want to point this out that a lot of people don't realize. Again, how many have taken a Coursera course? Yeah, there's a few people. Have you read the contract? No, that's what I thought. People. Well, in the contract it says, you may not use as part of any tuition-based or for-credit certification program. So the knowledge you have in your head, if you learn it from Coursera, you can't do what you want with it. They own the knowledge in your head. Now, isn't that a new concept? Huh? Hey, totally new concept. They own what's in your head. You're not allowed to do what you want. You have the knowledge and you can't use it for credit at any other institution. And I challenged one of the Coursera leaders about that at a meeting once, and he backed it up. He said, "No, we don't want you using this for credit at any other institution." But my own feeling is I can't believe this would stand up in court. But who knows? Who knows? Anyway, what it means is that the Coursera certificate is useless. Now, a course can be broken down, and you look at it this way: the MOOC is the content, the accreditation is the formal assessment, and the interaction can come from peer learning. And this is the breakdown that they could all be separate. They don't all have to be in the one institution. Disaggregation. We can disaggregate the different parts of the delivery system. Now, in July 2012, how many have heard of this, the Pentalogy decision? You should. I mean, the biggest proponent of it is from University of Ottawa. He's been one of the biggest publicizers of it, Michael Geist. No? And anyway, this is a very, very important decision in Canada regarding fair dealing. And what the Supreme Court of Canada told us, quite contrary to, by the way, to what the Association of Universities and Colleges Canada was telling us, is that there were different rules for paper and digital content. And the Supreme Court has told us very clearly, by the way, with no ambiguity, that class copies are okay. You can make as many copies of a substantial part of content as you want for your class. This is fair dealing. It's perfectly allowed. You can put them into a course pack. That's allowed. And the AUCC was telling us it wasn't allowed. And now we know it is allowed, and it came very clearly from the Supreme Court of Canada. Fair dealing, different rules for different types of technology. They said no. The Supreme Court said no, it's technologically neutral, whether it's paper, on a tablet, in a PC, whatever new technology comes in the future, the law is neutral. We can use it fair dealing on any kind of technology. And the big statement was this, that the AUCC kept telling us, you've got to be very careful. You can't do this, you can't do that. This is restricted, this is that, this rules, regulations, everything. What the Supreme Court said is that fair dealing must have a large and liberal interpretation. It must. They don't say it should or maybe or might or whatever. They use the word must. It must have a large and liberal interpretation. So the way I see it is this, is you want to know what is fair dealing? It's very simple. Ask yourself this question. Am I a fair person? If the answer is yes, then you ask the second question. Does this seem fair to me, using this material? If the answer is yes, it probably is fair, and it's fair dealing. And there's a 6-point test about financial harm and everything else, but really that is the test, and that's what the Supreme Court is telling us, and it's a very clear decision. And still, Access Copyright and the copyright collectives are still trying to make us pay for the rights that we have anyway. We have these rights. We don't have to pay Access Copyright for them. And it just is not, it is not necessary. The Supreme Court has supported us in this. And the new copyright law that came out after this decision has expanded fair dealing even further to clearly and unequivocally support educational uses. So we have in Canada a wide range of material that we can use, a substantial part of it. Nobody's saying you can take somebody's whole book and use it, or even half a book, but a substantial part. You could take a whole picture, because you've got to ask yourself, if I need this picture for my course, is it reasonable to cut it into pieces? Well, no, you need the whole picture. So that's reasonable, and you can use it. And what I find is that we're just not taking advantage of fair dealing, the rights that we have. And we need to take advantage of them, because if you don't use them, you lose them. Finish off now. Professor Whiteside at MIT says this, that affordability in the future may be the first requirement, not an afterthought. The race may not be to the swift, but to the cheap. We've got to find ways of lowering the costs of education. Now, the Royal Society in England is the oldest scholarly society in the world, and they tell us that the restriction of the commons by patents, copyright, and databases is not in the interests of society, and it unduly hampers scientific endeavor. And Pope Benedict tells us, on the part of rich countries, there is excessive zeal for protecting knowledge through an unduly rigid assertion of the right to intellectual property. What does that tell us? That science and God is on our side. We are on the side of the angels. Thank you very much. Merci. I can't believe everyone agrees with me. Better go to the mic.
Just an interrogation, because if we have a lot of resources, open resources, some politicians could say, okay, I don't want to pay very much a new university professor because it's not useful, because he will use all that stuff. Le problème est celui peut-être justement d'une partie de la prolétarisation possible de la profession enseignante, justement. Et c'est très difficile de maintenir un équilibre dans tout ça. Et je ne sais pas quels sont les modes de régulation qui vont permettre de garder un équilibre.
Je suis d'accord. The politicians are going to do what politicians do, but I don't think it'll matter whether you reduce the cost of books or not. They're still going to try to reduce your salary and everybody else's, and yes. That's going to happen in any case. Yeah, I wouldn't make a decision based on what I think they're going to do. That's going to happen. Mm-hmm.
Yes, but maybe there's things to invent, to create new things. I don't know, because global propriety of resources for teachers, I don't know. Maybe there's something to invent.
Yeah, but I don't understand what you think, that OER will stop people inventing?
A regulation, a sort of regulation.
That's not I'm trying to get away from regulation.
Yes,
OER is to get out of the regulation.
But sometimes we need regulation. That's a problem.
Yeah, oh no, I'm not against copyright law. If I were to write a book like, you know, the 50 Shades of McGrail, and I thought I could make $10 million or $50 million, I'd do it. Yeah. But if I'm writing a book on learning objects, perspectives, and things like that, I know I'm not going to make $1 million on it. So I open it and let people have it. I mean, that's the way it is for most scholarly books. You're not going to make a fortune on it. But good luck to you if you write your novel and can make that money. I'm not against that. I support the privilege monopoly. I support that. We should have a privilege monopoly. I don't support that it goes 50 years past the death of the author, or 70 years in most other countries. I don't support that, but I do believe that the first law was reasonable, 14, 18 years, and then you can apply for an extension for another 10. That's reasonable, and I think we should have that. But it is a monopoly, and monopolies stop other people from using the work, and it is a damper on scientific endeavor, as the Royal Society tells us.
It's more a comment than a question. I realize that I'm a professor, and I'm like in the catch-22. If I don't sign the cession de droit, my article and my chapter won't be published. So I don't feel that I have the power. And I'm in education, I understand what you mean, but where can we start to reverse that power?
Well, you're right. You don't have the power there, but we have started already the open access movement. There are now over 1,000 open access scholarly journals. We host one, the International Review of Research in Open and Distance Learning. That's the way to go. And this is what Lawrence Lessig, the lawyer in the States, said. He said, copyright is great for Britney Spears. But for educators,
Yes, I know.
we've got to bypass it and go to open. And the way around your predicament is go to open. Sometimes you can't. But for me now, I don't review for Elsevier or any of those big companies. I only review for open publications. And I think more of us should start thinking in those terms and supporting open publications.
But I don't know if in the Francophone world we have those open publication. I'm just wondering, because I'm dealing with even university publication.
Well, if you don't have the open ones, and I'm not that familiar with the Francophone world, but I suspect that's true.
We do.
Is that you just have to suck it up and give it to them.
Okay.
Like,
So.
I've done it in the past, and now I don't have to because there's enough. But I've given away my copyright, and
Of course. But
until we get more Francophone publications, then you may have to just go along with that. Sorry.
A very mundane question on OER Universitas and prior learning assessment. The members, do they require a minimum fraction of the degree taken at their universities to recognize it?
All the universities are independent, and most of them do.
Yeah. Okay.
Athabasca, we don't.
You don't, okay.
You don't have to take any courses from Athabasca to get an Athabasca degree. We will count up your credits and use PLAR and challenge for credit many other ways. We have never given a degree to anyone, but on paper, somebody could come and get one that way. Usually they come and we assess them, and there's usually 3 or 4, maybe 5 courses that they have to take with us.
Yeah, I had a question. I was wondering what sort of growth is there at this time, like in the last few years, in terms of the number of courses that have been taken at these universities and possibly graduates in the partnered universities?
Oh, it's just, we're right at the beginning of
Okay.
OERU. We started last year, and we're talking about maybe 100 students.
Oh, okay.
We're just ramping up now, and but watch out. I think there's going to be an explosion.
All right.
Of
I
interest.
just had one other
Yeah.
small comment, Rory, in terms of the control of the copyright, is that I was thinking after you explained that, I could probably for sure guess the one car that you would never own is the Enclave. Do you know there was a car called that? No.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, yeah, some GM thing.
Thank you very much.